In the scorching desert of Arizona Territory, 1871, where the sun carved shadows like knife wounds across the red earth, a man's honor was measured by his word and his gun. But what happens when a hired killer discovers that everything he believed was built on lies? What price does a man pay when he must choose between gold and his soul? This is the story of Jack Monroe, a cowboy who rode into the desert to take a life, but found something far more precious than money, a love that would either redeem him or destroy everything he thought he knew about right and wrong. But before we begin, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us where you're listening from. The saloon in Tucson reeked of whiskey, tobacco, and desperation. Jack Monroe sat hunched over a scarred wooden table, his weathered hands wrapped around a glass of rot-gut whiskey that had seen better days. The Arizona sun had baked the color from his once brown hair, leaving it the shade of desert sand, and his blue eyes held the weariness of a man who'd seen too much violence. "You listening, Monroe?" The voice belonged to Colonel Benjamin Hartwell, a man whose military bearing couldn't quite hide the greed that lurked behind his steel-gray eyes. He leaned across the table, his pristine uniform a stark contrast to Jack's dust-covered clothing. "I'm listening," Jack replied, his voice hoarse from trail dust and too many cigarettes. He'd been 3 days without work, and his stomach reminded him of that fact with every rumble. Hartwell reached into his jacket and produced a leather pouch that clinked with the unmistakable sound of gold coins. $500, Monroe. More money than you've seen in 5 years of herding cattle and breaking broncos. Jack's eyes fixed on the pouch, but his expression remained neutral. In his line of work, the kind that existed in the gray spaces between law and lawlessness, showing too much interest was a rookie mistake. "What's the job?" "There's an Apache woman. Goes by the name Aylen. She's been leading raids against settler families, killing innocent people." Hartwell's jaw tightened. "Women and children, Monroe. She's got to be stopped." The cowboy took a slow sip of his whiskey, feeling the burn as it went down. He'd heard the stories, Apache war parties sweeping down from the mountains, leaving destruction in their wake. But something about Hartwell's tone didn't sit right. "Why not send the cavalry? That's what they're for." "The cavalry's stretched thin. Besides, this requires discretion. The woman's got followers. Taking her out clean and quiet will send a message without starting a full-scale war." Hartwell pushed the pouch across the table. "You track her down. You kill her. You keep the peace. Everyone wins." Jack stared at the gold, remembering the empty shelves in his small cabin, the holes in his boots, the way his ribs showed through his shirt. $500 could buy him a new start, maybe even a small ranch. But killing a woman, even an Apache woman, sat heavy in his chest. "What makes you think I'm the man for this job?" Jack asked. "Because you're the best tracker in the territory, and because you've got nothing left to lose." Hartwell's smile was cold as winter wind. "Your reputation precedes you, Monroe. They say you can track a ghost across solid rock." The compliment felt like a weight around Jack's neck. His reputation had been built on violence and loss, on choices that haunted his dreams. But a man had to eat, and the frontier didn't offer many options for someone with his particular skills. "Where was she last seen?" Jack asked, knowing he was crossing a line he might not be able to uncross. "Reports put her in the Chiricahua Mountains, somewhere near Apache Pass." "But Monroe," Hartwell leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper, "she's dangerous. Don't let her looks fool you. She's a killer, and she'll put a knife in your back soon as look at you." Jack nodded slowly, then reached for the pouch. The gold was heavy in his palm, heavier than it should have been. "I'll need supplies. Food, ammunition, a good horse." "Already arranged. There's a bay mare waiting at the livery, along with everything you'll need for 2 weeks on the trail." Hartwell stood, straightening his uniform. "Bring me proof when it's done. A scalp, jewelry, something to show the job's finished." As Hartwell walked away, his boots clicking on the wooden floor, Jack sat alone with his whiskey and his new burden. Through the grimy window, he could see the desert stretching endlessly toward the mountains, where somewhere an Apache woman waited, unknowing that death rode toward her on a bay mare. The bartender, a grizzled man named Murphy, ambled over with a bottle. "On the house," he said, refilling Jack's glass. "You look like a man who's made a hard choice." "Seems like that's all there is these days," Jack replied, staring into the amber liquid. "Hard choices and harder consequences. That's the frontier for you. A man makes his choices, and the desert judges him for it." Murphy cleaned a glass with practiced efficiency. "You heading out soon?" "Dawn." Jack tossed back the whiskey, feeling it burn away some of the doubt. "Got a long ride ahead of me." But as he sat there, listening to the sounds of the saloon around him, the clack of poker chips, the scratch of fiddle music, the low murmur of men's voices, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that he was riding toward something that would change him forever. The gold in his pocket felt like 30 pieces of silver, and the weight of it made his shoulders ache. 3 days into the Chiricahua Mountains, Jack had found her trail. The signs were subtle, a displaced rock here, a broken twig there, but to eyes trained in the art of tracking, they told a story as clear as words on a page. The woman called Aylen moved like smoke through the desert, leaving barely a trace of her passage. The morning sun painted the canyon walls in shades of gold and crimson as Jack followed the trail higher into the mountains. His bay mare, a steady animal named Dusty, picked her way carefully over the rocky terrain. The air was thinner here, carrying the scent of pine and sage, and Jack found himself breathing harder than usual. He'd expected to find signs of violence, burned settlements, scattered belongings, the aftermath of raids. Instead, he found something else entirely. Hidden in a protected valley, he discovered a small Apache camp. But this wasn't a war party. These were families, elders, women, children, huddled together in makeshift shelters, their faces gaunt with hunger and fear. Jack dismounted and approached carefully, his hand resting on his gun, but not drawing it. An old man emerged from the largest shelter, his weathered face creased with suspicion and resignation. "You are the one they call Monroe," the old man said in heavily accented English. "We have heard of you." "I'm looking for a woman named Aylen," Jack replied, his voice steady despite the growing unease in his chest. "I was told she leads raids against settlers." The old man's eyes flashed with something that might have been anger or might have been grief. "Aylen leads no raids. She leads her people away from death." He gestured toward the camp. "These are all who remain of our band. The soldiers came to our village. They said we had broken the treaty. They gave us no chance to speak." Jack felt something cold settle in his stomach. "What happened?" "My daughter tried to make peace. She spoke their language, knew their ways. She went to them with a white flag." The old man's voice grew heavy. "They shot her anyway. Said she was a threat. Now they hunt us like animals." "Your daughter, was she Aylen?" "Aylen is my granddaughter. She tends the sick, gathers medicine, teaches the children. But the soldiers, they make her into a demon in their stories." The old man studied Jack with eyes that seemed to see straight through him. "You come to kill her, yes? For their gold." Jack's hand moved away from his gun. Around the camp, he could see children playing with sticks and stones, their laughter a strange counterpoint to the gravity of the situation. Women worked quietly over small fires, stretching meager supplies to feed their families. These weren't the fierce warriors he'd been led to expect. "Where is she now?" Jack asked. "Gathering medicine plants in the high meadows. She will return before sunset." The old man stepped closer. "You seem different from the others they send. Perhaps you will listen to truth instead of lies." "What truth?" "The truth that we have taken nothing from the white man except what we need to survive. The truth that we want only to live in peace, to raise our children, to honor our ancestors." The old man's voice carried the weight of generations. The truth that Aylen has never raised a hand in violence against anyone. Jack spent the rest of the day in the camp, and with each hour, his certainty crumbled a little more. He watched children play games that reminded him of his own childhood, saw women working with quiet dignity despite their circumstances, listened to elders tell stories that spoke of honor and respect for all life. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Jack heard footsteps on the trail. He turned to see a woman approaching the camp, her arms full of plants and roots. She was perhaps 25, with long black hair braided with small blue beads, and eyes that seemed to hold the wisdom of someone much older. She stopped when she saw Jack, her gaze moving from his face, to his gun, to his horse. For a moment, they simply looked at each other across the dying fire. Then she set down her burden and approached slowly. "I am Aylen," she said, her English clear and unaccented. "I know why you have come." Jack felt his throat tighten. Up close, she was nothing like the savage killer he'd been hired to eliminate. There was strength in her bearing, yes, but also a gentleness that reminded him of his own mother. "I was told you were leading raids against settlers." "I lead my people away from death," she replied simply. Nothing more. She gestured to the plants she'd gathered. "These are for the children. Winter comes, and we have little food. The roots will help them survive. The man who hired me, he says you've killed women and children." Aylen's expression didn't change, but Jack saw pain flicker in her eyes. "I have delivered many children into this world. I have saved many lives with my medicine, but I have never taken a life." She sat down beside the fire, her movements graceful despite her exhaustion. "May I ask your name?" "Jack Monroe." "Jack Monroe," she repeated, as if tasting the words. "That is a strong name. It should belong to a man of honor." The words hit Jack like a physical blow. Honor. When had he last thought of himself as a man of honor? "I'm not sure it does anymore." "Honor is not something you lose," Aylen said quietly. "It is something you choose, every day, with every action." She looked at him steadily. "What will you choose now, Jack Monroe?" As darkness fell over the camp, Jack sat by the fire, watching Aylen tend to the sick and comfort the frightened. She moved among her people with the grace of someone who had accepted the burden of leadership, but also with the tenderness of someone who genuinely cared for every soul in her care. The gold in his pocket felt heavier than ever, and for the first time in years, Jack Monroe began to question not just his mission, but the man he had become. Jack had been in the Apache camp for 3 days, and with each passing hour, the weight of his mission grew heavier. He'd come to kill a woman he now knew to be innocent, and the realization sat in his chest like a stone. The gold in his pocket, blood money, he now understood, seemed to burn against his leg every time he moved. On the 3rd morning, he found Aylen by the stream that ran through the valley, washing herbs she'd gathered the day before. The early light caught the blue beads in her hair, making them sparkle like captured sky. "You are troubled," she said without looking up from her work. "You have been since you arrived." Jack settled beside her on a flat rock, careful to keep distance between them. "I've been thinking about what you said, about honor. And what have you concluded?" "That I lost mine somewhere along the way. Maybe when I came back from the war, maybe before that. Hard to say exactly when." He picked up a smooth stone and turned it over in his hands. "I've done things that keep me awake at night." Aylen's hands stilled in the water. The war changed many men. It took their innocence and gave them pain in return. "How do you know about the war?" "I lived near Fort Huachuca before we were forced to move. I saw the soldiers return, the ones who survived. They carried their suffering like a weight on their shoulders." She looked at him directly. "You carry that same weight, Jack Monroe." The use of his name sent an unexpected warmth through him. In the 3 days he'd been here, she'd begun to use it more frequently, and each time it sounded different from how others said it. Less like a label and more like something precious. "I was at Gettysburg," Jack said quietly. 3 days in July that felt like 3 years. When it was over, I couldn't go back to being the man I was before. The world seemed smaller, meaner, like all the good had been bled out of it. "So you became a hunter of men." It wasn't a question, and Jack didn't try to deny it. Seemed like the only thing I was good at anymore, and it paid well. "But you have not killed me." Jack looked at her, studying the way the morning light played across her features. In the 3 days he'd been here, he'd watched her tend to the sick, teach the children, mediate disputes among the adults. She was a leader in the truest sense, not through force or fear, but through wisdom and compassion. "No," he said finally, "I haven't." "Why?" The question hung in the air between them like morning mist. Jack had been asking himself the same thing for 3 days, and the answer frightened him more than any gunfight ever had. Because you're not what they said you were. Because everything I was told was a lie. He paused, then added more quietly, and because I'm beginning to understand that killing you wouldn't just be murder. It would be the final death of whatever honor I have left. Aylen set aside her herbs and turned to face him fully. And what will you do with this understanding? Before Jack could answer, the sound of approaching horses echoed through the valley. He was on his feet instantly, his hand moving to his gun. At the camp, people scattered like startled birds, grabbing children and possessions as they fled toward the hidden paths that led deeper into the mountains. How many? Aylen asked, her voice calm despite the chaos around them. Jack listened carefully to the hoofbeats. 6, maybe 7. Moving fast. He looked at her urgently. You need to go. Now, what about my people? They know these mountains better than any soldier. They'll be safe if you're not here to draw attention. Jack grabbed her hand without thinking. Please, Aylen. If they find you here, they'll kill everyone. She looked down at their joined hands, then back at his face. And what about you? I'll tell them I lost your trail. Buy you time to get your people to safety. They will not believe you. Maybe not, but it's the only chance we have. For a moment, Aylen hesitated. Then she squeezed his hand gently. There's a place, she said. A hidden canyon 2 days' ride north. My people know it. If you change your mind about us, you can find me there. Us? Jack asked, though he knew what she meant. Over the past 3 days, something had grown between them, a connection that transcended the circumstances that had brought them together. I see the man you could be, Jack Monroe. The man you were before the war took your innocence. That man is still there, waiting for someone to believe in him again. Before Jack could respond, she was gone, moving through the camp with quiet efficiency, gathering her people and leading them toward the hidden paths. Within minutes, the valley was empty except for Jack and the approaching sound of horses. He didn't have long to wait. Colonel Hartwell rode into the camp at the head of 6 soldiers, their uniforms dusty from hard riding. The colonel's face was grim as he surveyed the abandoned camp. Monroe. Hartwell's voice cracked like a whip. Where is she? Jack kept his expression neutral. Gone. Probably been gone for hours. And you just let her go. I'm a tracker, not a magician. She had a head start, and she knows these mountains better than anyone. Jack gestured to the cold fire pits and scattered belongings. Looks like they cleared out in a hurry. Hartwell dismounted and walked through the camp, his boots kicking at the abandoned possessions. This doesn't look like a war party's camp, Monroe. Where are the weapons? The war paint? The scalps? Maybe your information was wrong, Jack suggested carefully. The colonel's eyes narrowed. My information is never wrong. He studied Jack's face. You've been here 3 days. In 3 days, you couldn't catch one Apache woman. The trail went cold. It happens. Does it? Hartwell's hand moved to his sidearm. Or did you let her go on purpose? Did you forget what side you're on, Monroe? Jack felt the familiar calm that came before violence. His own hand drifted toward his gun, but he forced himself to remain still. I'm on the side that pays me, but I can't deliver what doesn't exist. For a long moment, the 2 men stared at each other. Around them, the soldiers waited tensely, sensing the potential for violence. Finally, Hartwell stepped back. You've got one more chance, Monroe. Find her, kill her, or don't bother coming back to Tucson. And if I discover you've been playing me false. He let the threat hang in the air. After the soldiers rode away, Jack stood alone in the empty camp. In the distance, he could see smoke rising from the mountains, where Aylen's people had taken refuge. They were safe for now. But Hartwell wouldn't give up easily, and Jack knew that his own time was running out. He had a choice to make, one that would define the rest of his life. He could return to Tucson, tell Hartwell the woman was dead, and collect his blood money. Or he could ride north to a hidden canyon, where a woman who believed in honor was waiting for him to remember who he used to be. As he mounted his horse, Jack felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Hope. It was fragile as a bird's egg, but it was there. And for the first time since the war ended, he began to believe that maybe, Just maybe. There was still a chance for redemption. The hidden canyon was everything Aylen had promised and more. Nestled deep in the heart of the Chiricahuas, it was a place of impossible beauty. Tall cliffs that caught the morning light like cathedral windows, a clear stream that sang over smooth stones, and meadows where wildflowers bloomed despite the harsh desert that surrounded them. Jack had ridden for 2 days to find it, following landmarks Aylen had described and trusting in his ability to read the land. When he finally crested the ridge and saw the canyon spread below him, he felt something loosen in his chest, a tension he'd carried for so long he'd forgotten it was there. Aylen was waiting for him beside the stream, as if she'd known he would come. She wore a simple dress of soft leather, decorated with the same blue beads that adorned her hair. When she saw him, her face lit up with a smile that made the morning sun seem pale by comparison. "You came," she said simply. "I had to," Jack replied, dismounting from his horse. "I couldn't go back to being the man I was before I met you." They stood facing each other across the stream, and Jack felt the weight of the past 3 weeks settling between them. So much had changed since that day in the saloon when he'd accepted Hartwell's blood money. He'd ridden into the desert as a killer for hire and emerged as something else entirely, a man who had remembered what it meant to choose honor over profit. "Your people," he asked. "Safe. There are other bands in the deeper mountains who have taken them in. They will survive the winter." Aylen's expression grew serious. "But you've made powerful enemies. Hartwell will not forgive being deceived." "I know." Jack had thought about little else during the 2-day ride. "But I couldn't live with myself if I'd gone through with it. Not after knowing you, seeing what you really are." "And what am I?" she asked softly. Jack looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not the savage killer of Hartwell's lies, but a woman of extraordinary courage and compassion, a woman who had chosen to heal rather than harm, to lead rather than follow, to hope rather than despair. "You're everything I'd forgotten the world could be," he said. "You're proof that there's still good in this world, still honor worth fighting for." They spent the day together, walking through the canyon and talking about their lives, their dreams, their fears. Jack told her about his childhood on a small farm in Kansas, about the woman he'd planned to marry before the war took everything from him. Aylen spoke of her people's history, their connection to the land, their struggles to survive in a world that seemed determined to destroy them. As the sun began to set, painting the canyon walls in shades of gold and crimson, they sat beside the stream. The water murmured softly over the stones, and somewhere in the distance, a nightbird called to its mate. "I love you," Jack said quietly. The words came out before he could stop them, but once spoken, he realized they were the truest thing he'd ever said. Aylen turned to look at him, her dark eyes reflecting the dying light. "I love you too, Jack Monroe. I have loved you since the moment you chose not to kill me." "What kind of future can we have?" Jack asked. "I'm a wanted man now. Hartwell will put a price on my head, and there'll be others looking to collect it." "Then we'll face that future together," Aylen said simply. "My people have a saying. The storm cannot defeat the mountain, but it can carve beauty from the stone. We are strong enough to weather any storm." Jack reached for her hand, marveling at how right it felt in his. "I want to be worthy of that love. I want to be the man you see in me." "You already are," she said. "You proved that when you chose honor over gold." They were married 3 days later in a ceremony that blended Apache tradition with promises that came from the heart. The remaining members of Aylen's band gathered to witness their union, and Jack felt accepted into a community in a way he'd never experienced before. The old man who was Aylen's grandfather performed the ceremony, speaking in Apache and English about the sacred nature of the bond between two people who choose to walk the same path. Jack and Aylen exchanged rings made from silver and turquoise, symbols of their commitment to each other and to the life they would build together. But their happiness was short-lived. On the 4th day after their marriage, riders approached the canyon. Jack was ready for them, his rifle loaded and his resolve firm. But when he saw who led them, his heart sank. It wasn't Hartwell. It was a full cavalry unit, led by a young lieutenant who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else in the world. "Jack Monroe," the lieutenant called out. I have orders to arrest you for treason and conspiracy with enemy forces." Jack stepped forward, his hands visible but ready to reach for his weapons. "I've committed no treason, Lieutenant. I've simply chosen to live with honor. You were contracted to eliminate a hostile Apache leader. Instead, you've taken up with her. That's treason in the eyes of the territorial government." "Then the territorial government is wrong," Jack replied. "These people want nothing more than to live in peace." The lieutenant shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. "I have my orders, Monroe. Surrender now, and I'll guarantee you a fair trial." Jack felt Aylen step up beside him. Her presence gave him strength, reminded him of everything he now had to fight for. "I'm not going anywhere, Lieutenant. This is my home now, and these are my people." "Then you're forcing my hand," the lieutenant said regretfully. "Sergeant, prepare the men." What followed was brief but decisive. Jack had spent years perfecting his skills with a gun, but more importantly, he now had something worth fighting for. The canyon provided excellent cover, and Aylen's people knew every hiding place and vantage point. When the shooting stopped, the cavalry was in full retreat. Jack had taken a bullet in the shoulder, but he was alive. More importantly, his new family was safe. As Aylen tended to his wound, Jack looked around at the people who had accepted him as one of their own. They were outlaws now, all of them, but they were outlaws with honor. They would have to go deeper into the mountains, farther from civilization, but they would be together. "Do you regret it?" Aylen asked as she wrapped his shoulder. "Giving up your old life?" Jack looked at her, at the life they'd built together in such a short time, at the people who had become his family. "Never," he said. "I was dead before I met you. You brought me back to life." Years later, when the Apache Wars were over and the territory had become a state, there would be stories told around campfires about the cowboy who fell in love with an Apache woman. Some would say it was a tragedy, others would call it a romance. But those who knew the truth understood that it was something more. It was the story of a man who had lost his way and found it again through love. Jack and Aylen lived out their lives in the deep mountains, raising children who grew up knowing both worlds and loving them both. They built a life based on honor, compassion, and the understanding that love was stronger than hatred, that truth was more powerful than lies. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the sunset painted the canyon walls in gold and crimson, Jack would think about the choice he'd made in a dusty saloon in Tucson. He'd been hired to kill an Apache woman, but instead, he'd found something infinitely more valuable. He'd found himself. The gold had long since been spent, but the love remained. And in the end, that was all that mattered. 20 years later, when Arizona had become a state and the old conflicts had faded into history, a young newspaper reporter would travel to the Chiricahua Mountains to investigate rumors of a white man who had lived among the Apache. He would find an elderly couple tending a small ranch in a hidden valley, their children grown and scattered to the winds. The man would be graying but still strong, his eyes holding the wisdom of someone who had chosen love over hatred. The woman would be graceful and serene, her hair silver, but her spirit still bright. The reporter would ask about the old stories, the legends of the cowboy who had turned his back on his own kind for love. The couple would smile and offer him coffee, speaking of the past with the gentle nostalgia of people who had lived fully and without regret. "Was it worth it?" the reporter would ask. "Giving up everything you knew for love?" The old cowboy would take his wife's hand, their fingers intertwining with the ease of long practice. "Son," he would say, "I didn't give up anything. I found everything I'd been looking for my whole life." And in the distance, the mountains would stand eternal and unchanging, keeping the secrets of all who had chosen love over fear, honor over profit, and hope over despair. If you like this story, leave your opinion in the comments and, of course, leave a like and subscribe. Turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any videos. Big hug and see you soon.